Good day, everybody. This is John Scarborough over here with the goats today. I just moved the sheep into their other pen over in there. Got them some new fresh green grass. Try to clean up their pasture where they're at. Just wanted to do a little bit of talking today. I wanted to address a question that I've gotten quite frequently on my channel, and that is, how many sheep can you run on a piece of property? So I'm going to try to answer that the best I can. Now, you can do a Google search and kind of get a pretty generic answer, and that answer to the Google search is however many cows you can run. You can run 7 sheep for every cow. So what I want to do today is address that answer and find out, with my experience, has that been true? Can I do more? Can I do less? Should you do more? Should you do less? And is it the same with goats as it is with sheep? So we're going to address that here in just a second. I wanted to show you all this, what we're actually doing here. These goats actually had gotten out. So one thing about goats that I don't like over sheep is that if there's a possibility, a way to get out, the goats are going to find it. So we actually went and got them some sunflower seeds that we were using for seed for our microgreens. We went and got them some of that and used it as feed, because I don't keep feed around for the goats or sheep. But we went and got some of that, and sometimes we use that as a good chicken feed as well. It's a really good grain, and it's actually a grain that they would have eaten. So if I was ever going to use grain for a sheep or a goat, that would be the grain I would use, would be a sunflower seed or something like that. But I don't think that it's something that you should do very often. Because I still think that it's better to just let them eat what's natural. So if you grew sunflowers and they had a short period of time that they were eating sunflowers, I think that would be fine. I think that would be good. That's probably natural. That's probably something they did. But I just wanted to address that real quick for anybody that's seeing the sunflowers that they're eating here. But when they get out, sometimes it is nice to be able to control them with something else. You need to be able to control them. So every now and then giving them a little bit of sunflower or something, or corn or whatever you have, just to make it to where you can easily control them and get them back in is a good approach. You should always be able to control every animal on your farm. So back to the question, guys. Like I said, the answer, the quick Google search that you can do, is about 7 sheep for every cow. So in my experience, this is somewhat true. And it's a really good guideline to start off, but it's not necessarily entirely true. And I will say this as well. I've heard some people say that you can add 7 sheep to the amount. So like, let's say, okay, so in our area, we need about 2 to 2.5 acres per cow. Okay, depending on how good that acreage is. So if it's not as good and it's not the best forage, you're probably going to want to be more like 2.5, maybe even 3. If it's really, really good top-notch forage across the entire 2 acres, then you're probably, you'd be fine with 2 acres for 1 cow. If you were just raising 1 beef cow for yourself, that cow, I will say this too, that cow means a cow-calf pair. Okay, so if you have 2 acres, you could actually run a cow-calf pair on that. Now, I don't think that math is taking into the account of that mama raising that baby all the way to finish. So when you finish a cow, and this is something I think a lot of people don't really think about when they're trying to raise meat for themselves. If let's say you've got a mama cow, you want to have that baby give birth. Well, first of all, you're not going to be able to put a bull with that, because then you got to have more acreage to keep your bull. You'd be better off to either purchase some semen or to get somebody else's, put your cow in with somebody else's or something like that. That's a story for a different day. We're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but the point is that's something you need to think about. The second thing is that if your goal is, if all you have is 2 acres, and I'm just going off of what we have, because the acreage is different everywhere. When I was living in West Texas, it was like 30 acres per cow, so it's a big, big difference. Okay, so keep that in mind too. You need to find out in your local area how many cows can you keep, and then you can use that 7 sheep to 1 cow-calf pair. You can use that to convert over. We'll get into that a little bit more and a little bit deeper here in just a second, because I don't think you should do that entirely at first. And there's some other things you should take into account too. Okay. But with the cows, don't think to yourself, if you have 2 acres, like if you live in my area, you have 2 acres, that's what you're good to be able to keep. Don't think that you can raise that mama and then have a baby and then raise that baby to 2 years old while that mother is having other babies. Okay. So if you were to raise a steer to finish, you'd have that baby and the mother would be nursing that baby for a while until she weaned it or you weaned it. Then she would have another baby in about a year. Okay. But you've got to raise that steer for 2 years. And a lot of times, if you're in the grass-fed industry, a lot of people have to raise it for 2.5 years. I've even heard of some people having to raise it for 3 years. Now that's a bit excessive on my end. We usually can get by with 2 years on our finish for our steers. Not everybody can do that, but the point is let's say it's about 2 years. That means that mama's going to have 2 babies after that. Don't think that you can support all of that on your 2 or 2.5 acres. You're only going to be able to support that mama and that baby. You're going to have to up that math a little bit. Now, that steer does not need that 2 acres. You won't need a full 2 acres for the steer, okay? And you won't need a full 2 acres for the yearling. So what you'll end up with when you get ready to process that steer, first of all, your best bet is to try to get it to where your steer is going to be processed in the spring. That way you have less to worry about as that steer gets older. Okay, so process it in the spring, and then you'll have that 1 steer, and you'll have the one steer, and then you'll have the 1 yearling, and then you'll have the 1 cow-calf pair. The cow-calf pair will need the 2 to 2.5 acres. I would say you're going to want to have about another 2 to 2.5 acres, or just you're going to have to supplement with some hay or something like that. And if you're not trying to do grass fed and you're feeding, then you'll just have to supplement with feed. Even if you're doing a grain finish, I would suggest always having enough land. Okay, I would suggest always trying to have at least somewhere close to enough. Just because it's not the best thing to overstock your land, even if you're okay with the grain finish. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a grain finish. I'm trying to get this gate closed, y'all. I'm gonna lay the phone down. Y'all just bear with me. I'm sorry about this. These gates are always just a little bit of a hassle to get closed. So I'm gonna walk over here to the sheep while I'm talking, and I'm gonna get to the answer here. This is good information that I think everyone needs to know. So my suggestion would be to at least have 4 acres if you're trying to raise a steer, especially if you're trying to do it on grass. And be prepared to give them extra hay if they need it, okay? That would be my suggestion, just to keep that in mind, because I've heard a lot of people, they ask about that and they say, well, I've got 2 acres in this area. I should be fine to have a mama and have that mama raise me, basically raise my own steers each year and have a new steer to put in the freezer every year. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry, unfortunately that's not going to work. If you only have 2 acres, you're gonna be a lot better off to purchase a steer and raise that steer on those 2 acres. You're gonna have a lot less issues like that. That would be my suggestion. Costs you a little bit more money as far as buying the steer goes. The plus side is you can buy the steer at a younger age. You could buy them at weaning age and then raise them all the way up on that 2 acres. You'll have a lot less cost in hay and everything else, and it might be worth doing. And you might get away with doing 2 steers and then feeding more hay during the winter. Anyway, so now we're going to go into the sheep and the goats. First of all, does this 7 sheep per cow-calf pair, does this mean that you can have 7 sheep with babies, or is this just 7 sheep? Well, from my experience, now I haven't seen any direct answer on this. From my experience, it does seem like you could have 7 sheep and 7 lambs. And from the people that I've talked to, okay, that seems to be the case, all right? The second thing is I do think that would translate right over into goats, because from my experience, the goats and the sheep seem to eat about the same amount of food. The one thing that I have noticed with sheep is that sheep seem to need a little more grass than goats do, okay? And that's a video for a different day too, but that is something that I will say, that you may have a little bit better luck with these numbers with goats. And it depends on your forage. Again, it all depends on your forage. The plus side to sheep or goats, because they are browsers, if your land is like a little bit more suboptimal land, you still could potentially get away with having that 7 sheep for those 2 to 2.5 acres. Because as long as there's some grass for the sheep, like I said, I feel like I'm learning from my experience. It's still anecdotal, but it's my experience. It seems to me that the sheep do need some grass. They just seem to do better with some grass. They're still browsers, but they need some, whereas goats don't seem to need it at all necessarily. They like it, but they don't need it. Doesn't seem like. So, but that's the plus side, is that you can have worse land with cattle, with sheep or goats. And I do think you can have the 7 sheep. But here's what I want to caution you on. I want to caution you on, like, say you only have 2 acres. I wouldn't suggest going out and immediately buying the 7 sheep. I would cut it down to like 5, especially at first, and then grow your herd to that 7. Okay, see how your land supports it. Now, what I'm going off of for our land is land that doesn't get fertilized. So no nitrogen, no amendments. Now, I'm not saying that we won't do soil tests, and I've never had to, but if I ever have to, I'm going to, if it needs to be limed or something like that, I will. But our land, we're not putting any nitrogens or anything like that. All we're doing is working with the soil, and we have lots of videos talking about that and teaching you how to do that. So keep that in mind. Like, if you are putting nitrogen into your soil, if you are amending your soil, those things are going to help you. So it's possible you could get away with a slightly different number. You could get away with more. Then a couple other things that you want to think about with your 7 sheep with your 7 sheep ratio is, when in our part of the area where we live, we have a lot of acorns, big trees like this. That my phone got cut off, guys, I'm sorry. But as I was saying, we have big trees that produce a lot of acorns, okay, all over our pastures. So this is another part of the equation that you have to think about when you're talking about cows versus sheep. Is cattle, when they eat the acorns, first of all, it could kill them, okay? So I've got videos talking about what to do, some protocol on that, so go check those videos out, okay? And don't forget to like and subscribe. That way you can see these types of videos as they come up. There's a lot of them that's already out. I've got over 400 videos on my channel talking about soil health and how to raise different types of animals and just all sorts of different things, and even the income side of things. So go check all those videos out when you get some time. But the cattle, if they don't die from eating the acorns, then they will lose weight, because it messes with their gut. It actually messes with their gut lining, and it's toxic for their gut. So even when it doesn't kill them, they actually lose calories. It actually messes with the calories that they're eating. So they actually end up needing more calories because they're eating that acorn, okay? And this is where it gets fascinating with goats and sheep, is that a goat and a sheep can eat the exact same acorn in the exact same 2 acres, and they will literally gain calories, okay? Because that does not affect their guts, okay? And that's one reason why putting sheep into a cattle pasture is a wonderful thing. Okay, like I said, be careful about, don't think I can have the 2 acres and get 7 sheep and 2 cows. You're not going to be able to quite do it, okay? I would start very, very cautiously and slowly work your way up and see how your land supports it. But if you have that 2 acres and then you have lots of acorns, that's something to think about, because that could be a really good feed source for them in the winter. It's hard to say how much you could do. I would argue that if you had enough acorn trees spaced out correctly to where it wasn't blocking the growth of the grass, okay, and enough other types of forages, maybe even upper forages, like we're talking about browse forages that are higher up along, that's not messing up any of the grass, I would say you could have even more than 7 sheep with all of the perfect scenarios. You're not going to get much more on your cattle. Your cattle are going to be very very subject. It's going to very much depend on the amount of actual grass, and that's just pretty much it. Is whatever grass there is, that's what's going to dictate how well those cows do and how many you can raise. Okay, and so I'm coming to you from a grass-fed perspective, but I'm also coming to you from these cows need hay. So if you have them on the 2 acres, like I said, you're going to have the hay. You're going to have to give them the hay in the winter. And that's the next, probably the best part about the sheep, is in my experience, you can have the 7 sheep with the same 2 acres, and that is with no hay, okay? So that is a definite plus. No hay, 7 sheep, and I mean, in this pasture, we've got a couple trees that are dropping acorns. These trees over here that you see, they're not in the pasture, so a few acorns, quite a few, but not near the whole tree is ending up in that pasture. This one's the only one that's dropping all acorns. Other than that, there are no other acorn trees in the other pasture or in this one. So it's a pasture that's not loaded. It's not gotten near the acorns as a lot of pastures. So I would say that that's not a big part of their diet. It's some of their diet, but it's not a big part. And like I said, when I bring them into their other pasture, I don't see any difference in what they're eating. So I know good and well that these sheep seem to be still doing quite well with no hay and with that same conversion. So I hope that this helps. This is something I'm wanting to help people to see, is that the 7 sheep seem to be a pretty good conversion. I would err on the side of caution in the beginning. But I would just know that the sheep are there's a lot of plus sides to starting with those sheep, especially for a very, very small plot of land. There's a huge plus sides in that, okay? Not to mention the fact that the cost to getting into the sheep is a lot cheaper, and the cost of buying your ram is a lot cheaper. That's a good St. Croix registered ram, and he still costs quite a bit less. I had to spend a good chunk for him, worth every penny, okay? But he's still quite a bit less than a good quality bull, which is what you're going to need. Okay, so those are things to consider about that. To me, those are the biggest plus sides, is knowing that added forage, added weeds are added food for them. Okay, that acorns is an extra food source. It could literally be a good way to finish lamb. I don't know that for sure, but I wouldn't be surprised. It sure isn't hurting them at all. And it's definitely a good way to help them to get through the winter. But then the fact that they don't need the hay, you don't have to supplement the hay for them, that in itself is huge, because these animals, beyond purchasing them, there's no money in them. You're not putting any money into it. So you have to buy them, and then you have to buy your ram, you know. And if there needs to be any, you know, if the land ever needs some amendments, you're going to need that, you know. And it's always, a lot of times it's better for your pocketbook to just go a little bit less than what you think you might need at first, and increase the quality of your soil. So that's one reason I say to start less. So start with your 5, slowly build your soil, get your soil built up, the health of your soil really, really good. All of that extra carbon that you leave on the ground, so if you have any so-called waste, any of this extra carbon, well, that just turns into good microbes and good soil. And over time, you get to where, see, I can't even get to the dirt here. Can't even get down into it. Over time, you just get to where you got a lot better soil. Okay, much, much better soil. And so then you get to where you reap the benefits of that, and you're able to max out your land without having all these extra amendments. Okay, there's a lot of people, a lot of farmers in different parts of the world that they're having trouble with nitrogen. There's different reasons. Some of it's laws. There's different reasons for it. And so it's really nice to think that it's possible to raise animals and raise food without any nitrogen. So if you're a small operation, if you have a small piece of land, I would consider that. I would consider either just buying a steer from someone that you know. I would definitely make sure it's someone that you know and trust, okay? Or start with some lambs. Get into some, get a couple of sheep, and you know, the meat's a little bit different. You have to think of it differently. You don't want to cook it like beef. It's not beef. You have to think of it differently. But if you cook it right and you season it right, it's actually really good. I am actually really surprised at the flavor of lamb and how I like it. I mean, I actually really like it. So we've added that into our diet now. We're not only eating beef, you know, beef and pork and chicken, but we're also eating lamb now as well, me and my wife. And we've started to sell it now. But it's just a really good, it's a lot better. It surprises you if you've never had it. So get out there, think about it, figure out what works for you, you know, and I encourage you to try it out. Try out some sheep. You know, as far as the goats go, we're going to get into it. We're going to have another video talking about sheep versus goats and talking about fencing and how you can do all of that. So y'all stay tuned for all of that, and we'll talk more about that, because the fencing is different, whether you're talking about cattle, goats, sheep, whatever. You know, to some degree, the cattle are probably the easiest getting cattle on your land over sheep and goats, but not necessarily. There are some things you can do and some things to think about. So we're gonna have another video discussing all of that. Okay, so if y'all have any other topics you want to talk about, or anything you want to know about sheep, goats, lambs, pigs, chickens, or raising them sustainably or regeneratively, which is what we like to do, on your own land for your own food or for resale, then let me know. Put it in the comments. Tell me what you want to see.